From the door to the bed, a night of passionate kisses. Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome to Mr. Peter Stories. I missed you all so much. You are not just my audience. You are my real family. Every time you respond to my stories, my heart fills with joy and pride. Type yes if you are satisfied and feeling the love. Before we begin, let me offer a special prayer for you. May your days be filled with love, peace, and happiness. May every obstacle turn into an opportunity, and every tear be replaced with joy. May your heart always find comfort, and your dreams become reality. May you and your loved ones be protected, guided, and blessed in all you do. And may our Mr. Peter Stories family continue to grow stronger in love, unity, and inspiration. Are you enjoying the stories? What lessons are they teaching you? And how did the last one make you feel? Let's begin with love. The autumn sun painted Manhattan's financial district in hues of amber and gold, its rays reflecting off the steel and glass towers that pierced the October sky. Julian Lancelot's Italian leather shoes clicked against the marble floors of Sterling and Reich Investment Banking's lobby, each step echoing with the confidence of a man who had conquered Wall Street before the age of 32. His tailored Tom Ford suit, a deep charcoal that complemented his sterling grey eyes, spoke of old money and refined taste. The security guard nodded deferentially as Julian passed through. Everyone in the building knew his reputation. As the youngest partner in the firm's history, he had orchestrated some of the most lucrative tech acquisitions of the past decade. His name carried weight in boardrooms from New York to Shanghai, yet something was missing. Despite the penthouse overlooking Central Park, despite the Ferrari gathering dust in his private garage, despite the string of socialites who graced his arm at charity galas, Julian felt hollow. The elevator ascended silently to the 47th floor, its mirrored walls reflecting a man who appeared to have everything. Julian adjusted his platinum cufflinks, a family heirloom bearing the Lancelot crest, and reviewed his schedule on his phone. The day's highlight was a pitch from a promising tech startup, something about blockchain innovation. He had seen thousands of these presentations, most filled with oversized dreams and undersized potential. The conference room was already filling with the usual suspects: venture capitalists in expensive suits, tech analysts clutching their tablets, and junior associates eager to impress. Julian took his customary seat at the head of the mahogany table, barely glancing at the presentation materials before him. That's when the room's energy shifted. Tialia Azana entered, and the world tilted on its axis. She commanded attention not through volume or flamboyance, but through an innate magnetism that drew every eye in the room. Her charcoal grey pantsuit was impeccably tailored, but it was her presence that captivated, a perfect blend of confidence and grace. Her skin, the color of rich mahogany, seemed to glow under the recessed lighting. Her hair was styled in elegant natural coils that framed a face that could have graced magazine covers, yet her eyes held something far more compelling: intelligence, determination, and a hint of defiance. Julian found himself sitting straighter, his usual mask of professional indifference slipping. He watched as she set up her presentation with practiced efficiency, noting the subtle ways she took control of the room. Her movements were purposeful, elegant, each gesture carrying the assurance of someone who had fought for her place in this world of white male privilege. "Good morning, everyone," she began, her voice rich and melodious, with undertones of power that demanded attention. "I'm Tialia Azana, CEO of Blockfin Technologies." She didn't just speak, she wove a spell with her words, painting a vision of the future that made even the most hardened skeptics lean forward in their seats. Julian found himself studying her hands as she gestured, noting the absence of rings, the perfectly manicured nails, the way her fingers danced through the air as she explained complex technological concepts. He caught himself wondering how those fingers would feel intertwined with his own, then immediately pushed the thought aside. This was business, nothing more, but as she delved into her presentation, Julian realized this was unlike anything he'd seen before. Her blockchain solution wasn't just innovative, it was revolutionary. She had identified a gap in the market that everyone else had overlooked, creating a system that could transform how financial institutions handled international transactions. Her technical knowledge was impressive, but it was her strategic vision that truly set her apart. Julian found himself challenging her projections, not out of skepticism, but from a desire to see her mind at work. "Your growth estimates seem aggressive," he interjected, his voice carrying across the room. "What makes you so confident in these numbers?" Tialia's eyes met his, and for a moment the rest of the room faded away. There was a spark of recognition, not of his face or his reputation, but of something deeper. She saw through his professional facade to the man beneath, just as he saw past her polished presentation to the fighter within. "Mr. Lancelot," she responded, a slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "I was wondering when you'd ask that." She pulled up a detailed market analysis that showed depth of research he hadn't expected. "These numbers aren't aggressive, they're conservative. Let me show you why." What followed was an intellectual dance, a back and forth of questions and answers that electrified the room. Julian would probe for weaknesses in her plan. Talia would parry with data and insights that showed she'd already considered and addressed his concerns. Their exchange was professional on the surface, but underneath ran currents of something more profound: mutual respect, intellectual attraction, and a growing awareness that this meeting was about more than just business. The other attendees watched in fascination as two brilliant minds engaged in this sophisticated duel. Julian noticed the way Tialia's eyes lit up when she was passionate about a point, how her hands moved with increasing animation as she defended her vision. She, in turn, found herself drawn to the intensity of his gaze, the sharp intelligence behind his questions, and the way his presence seemed to fill the room without overwhelming it. As the presentation concluded, Julian knew two things with absolute certainty. Blockfin technologies would revolutionize the industry, and Tialia Azana had awakened something in him that he thought had died years ago: hope. Hope for something more than mergers and acquisitions, more than the cold comfort of success, more than the lonely existence he'd built for himself. The room began to empty, but neither Julian nor Tialia moved. They were caught in each other's orbit, prolonging the moment under the pretense of discussing technical details. The air between them crackled with unspoken possibilities. "Your presentation was impressive," Julian finally said, gathering his papers with deliberate slowness. "But I have a few more questions, if you have time." Tialia's smile held a hint of understanding. "I always have time for thorough due diligence, Mr. Lancelot." The way she said his name sent a shiver down his spine. "Please call me Julian," he replied, surprised by how much he wanted to hear his first name on her lips. "Julian," she tested the name, and it felt like a caress. "I know a quiet place near here where we could continue this discussion, unless you have another meeting." He did have another meeting, several in fact. All important, all with people who had waited weeks to see him. Without hesitation, he pulled out his phone and began cancelling them all. "My schedule just cleared up," he said, watching the play of emotions across her face: surprise, pleasure, and something that mirrored his own growing attraction. As they walked together through the bustling streets of the financial district, both pretended this was just a business meeting, just two professionals discussing a potential investment. But their hearts knew better. With each step, they moved closer to a future neither had imagined possible, a love story that would challenge their worlds and change their lives forever. The autumn wind whipped around them, carrying the scent of possibility and the promise of something extraordinary, Above them, the towers of Manhattan scraped the sky, witnesses to countless stories of ambition and success. But today, they would witness something rarer, the beginning of a love that would defy expectations, break boundaries, and prove that some forces were stronger than society's prejudices. Julian and Tialia walked side by side, not yet touching, not yet acknowledging the electricity between them. But destiny had already set its wheels in motion. In the heart of New York City, among the crowds and chaos, two souls had found each other. Their journey was just beginning, and neither could have predicted the challenges, passion, and triumph that lay ahead. The sun continued its arc across the sky, casting their shadows together on the sidewalk, two silhouettes merging into one, a preview of the unity they would forge through love, determination, and the courage to defy a world that would try to keep them apart. Chapter 2. Worlds Collide. The Tribeca Grand's bar was a study in understated luxury, all dark wood and amber lighting that turned every surface to liquid gold. Julian sat at a corner table, absently swirling 20-year-old scotch in a crystal tumbler as he replayed the day's events in his mind. The leather-bound portfolio containing Tialia's proposal lay unopened before him, but he wasn't thinking about blockchain technology or market projections. Instead, his thoughts kept returning to the way her eyes had lit up when she defended her vision, the subtle floral scent that had lingered in the air when she passed, the musical quality of her laugh when he'd made an unexpectedly witty observation about cryptocurrency trends. He checked his watch, an antique Patek Philippe that had belonged to his grandfather. For the third time in as many minutes. They had agreed to meet at 8, and it was only 7:45. Julian Lancelot, the man known for making CEOs wait in his office, had arrived 20 minutes early. The irony wasn't lost on him. The bar's entrance caught his eye as another group of Wall Street types entered, their voices loud with the false confidence of deal-makers who measured their worth in dollar signs. Once, he had been just like them, believing that success could fill the emptiness inside. Now they seemed like caricatures, playing roles in a theater he no longer wanted to attend. Then she appeared, and the world sharpened into focus. Tialia had changed from her business suit into a deep burgundy dress that hugged her curves while maintaining an air of sophistication. Her natural hair was styled differently now, falling in soft coils that framed her face perfectly. She moved through the crowd with inherent grace, turning heads but seeming not to notice. Her eyes found Julian immediately, as if drawn by some magnetic force. He stood as she approached, an old-world courtesy that felt natural rather than performed. "You look," he began, but words failed him for perhaps the first time in his adult life. "So do you," she replied with a knowing smile, taking in his casual elegance, the perfectly tailored charcoal blazer over a black cashmere sweater that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Julian pulled out her chair, catching another hint of that intoxicating perfume as she sat. Up close, he noticed delicate gold earrings that caught the light when she moved, and a small scar near her left eyebrow that somehow made her even more beautiful for its imperfection. "I took the liberty of ordering champagne," he said, nodding to the vintage bottle chilling nearby. "Dom Perignon, 2008, unless you'd prefer something else." Tialia's lips curved in amusement. "The champagne is perfect, though I suspect you're used to people being impressed by such gestures." "Are you not impressed?" He raised an eyebrow, intrigued by her candor. "I'm more interested in the man beneath the gestures," she replied, meeting his gaze with disarming directness. "The one who asked questions today, not to challenge my authority, but to understand my vision. That was unexpected." The sommelier appeared, presenting the champagne with practiced flourish. Julian watched Tialia as she tasted it, noting how she took a moment to truly appreciate the wine, rather than simply accepting it as her due. Everything about her spoke of someone who understood value beyond price tags. "Tell me," she said, setting down her glass, "what does Julian Lancelot do when he's not terrorizing startup CEOs in boardrooms?" Honestly, he considered the question seriously. "I work. I attend charity galas that feel more like networking events. I maintain the appearance of the successful young partner that everyone expects me to be." "That's what you do," Talia observed, "not who you are." The distinction struck him like a physical blow. When was the last time anyone had cared to look beyond his carefully constructed facade? "Who I am," he began slowly, "is someone who built walls so high he forgot there was supposed to be something on the other side, until today." The vulnerability in his admission surprised them both. Talia reached across the table, her fingers brushing his hand in a touch that sent electricity through his body. "Today, in that boardroom, I saw moments when those walls came down, when you forgot to be Julian Lancelot, Sterling and Reich partner, and were just you." Their conversation flowed as naturally as the champagne, moving from professional ambitions to personal philosophies. Julian found himself sharing things he'd never told anyone, about the pressure of being a Lancelot, about his secret desire to use his wealth for more than just making more wealth. Talia spoke of her journey from Oakland to Silicon Valley, of being underestimated and overlooked until she was too brilliant to ignore. "My father," she said, tracing the rim of her glass, "worked 2 jobs to put me through Stanford. He taught me that excellence isn't about proving others wrong, it's about proving yourself right." "Your parents sound remarkable," Julian replied, thinking of his own father's cold demands for perfection. "They are. They taught me to be proud of who I am, to never apologize for taking up space in rooms that weren't built for people like me." She paused, studying him. "What about your family?" Julian's laugh held little humor. "The Lancelots have been on the right side of history's ledger books for so long, they've forgotten there's another side. My father's idea of parenting was hiring the best tutors and expecting nothing less than perfection." "And your mother?" "She—" Julian hesitated, then continued softly. "She tries to bridge the gap between who I am and who my father wants me to be. She's the only one who ever asked if I was happy." "Are you?" Talia's question hung in the air between them. Before he could answer, the maitre d' appeared to inform them that the kitchen was closing. They both started, realizing they had talked for hours without ordering food. "I know a place," Talia said, standing, "if you're willing to trust me." Julian didn't hesitate. "Lead the way." They emerged into the New York night, the city's energy pulsing around them. Talia led them through streets that grew progressively less familiar to Julian until they reached a small Ethiopian restaurant tucked between a bodega and a laundromat. The owner greeted Talia like family, ushering them to a quiet corner table. Julian watched in fascination as she ordered in fluent Amharic, the musical language adding yet another layer to her mystique. "My mother's best friend growing up was Ethiopian," she explained. "I spent half my childhood in her kitchen, learning the language along with the recipes." The food arrived on traditional injera bread, a feast of colors and aromas that Julian would never have experienced in his usual haunts. Talia taught him how to eat with his hands, laughing at his initial awkwardness, but appreciating his willingness to embrace something new. "This is incredible," he admitted, savoring flavors he couldn't name but knew he'd crave again. "Sometimes the best experiences come when we step outside our comfort zones," Talia said softly, and they both knew she wasn't just talking about food. As they shared the meal and more stories, the air between them grew charged with possibility. Their hands would brush accidentally on purpose, each touch sending sparks through their bodies. Their eyes met and held with increasing frequency, conveying things that words couldn't express. Later, as they walked through the cooling night air, neither wanted the evening to end. They found themselves in a small park, sitting on a bench beneath a canopy of trees and city lights. The usual New York cacophony seemed distant, creating a bubble of intimacy around them. "You never answered my question," Telia said quietly. "Are you happy?" Julian turned to face her, his heart pounding with an emotion he'd never felt before. "I wasn't," he said honestly. "Not until today." The space between them seemed to shrink of its own accord. Tialia's hand found his, their fingers intertwining naturally. Her skin was soft against his, the contrast in their colors creating a beautiful harmony. "We barely know each other," she whispered, even as she leaned closer. "I feel like I've known you forever," Julian replied, reaching up to trace the curve of her cheek with his free hand. "Like everything in my life was leading me to that boardroom today." Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, a question and an answer all at once. The second was deeper, more certain, filled with the promise of things to come. When they finally parted, both were breathing heavily, their foreheads resting together. "This is crazy," Telia said, but she was smiling. "Do you know what people will say?" "Let them talk," Julian replied with a fierceness that surprised him. "Some things are worth any price." They stayed in that park until the early hours of the morning, talking, laughing, sharing more kisses that grew increasingly passionate. They spoke of their dreams, their fears, their hopes for the future. Two people from different worlds, finding in each other something they hadn't known they were missing. As the first hints of dawn began to lighten the sky, they finally parted, each returning to their separate lives, but knowing nothing would ever be the same. Julian watched Tialia's cab disappear into the lightning city before heading to his own car, his mind and heart full of her. In his penthouse overlooking Central Park, he stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the city come alive. His reflection showed a different man than the one who had walked into that boardroom yesterday. Someone awakened, transformed by the power of unexpected love. His phone buzzed with a message from Tialia. "Thank you for showing me the man behind the walls." As he typed his reply, Julian knew with absolute certainty that his life had changed irrevocably. The careful plans, the family expectations, the societal constraints, none of it mattered compared to the way his heart raced when he thought of her smile. The sun rose over Manhattan, painting the sky in shades of possibility. In separate parts of the city, two people lay awake, replaying every moment of their evening together, knowing that their worlds had collided in the most beautiful way possible. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever obstacles society would place in their path, they had found something rare and precious, a love that defied expectations and transcended boundaries. The day was beginning, but for Julian and Tialia, something far more significant had already dawned. The realization that some connections are worth fighting for, no matter the cost. Chapter 3. Dancing with Fire. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of stolen moments and secret rendezvous. Manhattan became their playground, though not in the way Julian had known it before. Instead of exclusive restaurants and VIP lounges, he discovered the city's hidden treasures through Telia's eyes. Intimate jazz clubs in Harlem, where the music spoke directly to the soul, tiny art galleries in Chelsea, where emerging artists challenged perspectives, and family-owned restaurants in Queens, where the food told stories of generations. Tonight, they sat in a secluded corner of a small Italian restaurant in the West Village, one that had been serving the same family recipes since 1947. The checkered tablecloth and candlelight created an atmosphere far more authentic than any Michelin-starred establishment Julian usually frequented. "You're staring again," Tialia said, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth as she twirled pasta on her fork. "Can you blame me?" Julian reached across the table to take her hand, his thumb tracing patterns on her skin. "You're magnificent." She wore a deep blue dress that made her skin glow, and her hair was styled in an elegant updo that exposed the graceful line of her neck. A delicate gold necklace, his gift from last week, caught the candlelight with every movement. "Smooth talker," she teased, but her eyes held the same wonder he felt whenever they were together. "Though I have to admit, watching New York's most eligible bachelor eat carbonara in a tiny village restaurant is quite a sight itself." "I never knew what I was missing," he admitted. "All those years of expensive restaurants, and the best meals I've ever had, have been with you in places I never knew existed." Their bubble of happiness was briefly interrupted by the buzzing of Julian's phone. Another message from his father's secretary, requesting his presence at the family estate in Greenwich this weekend. He silenced it without responding. Telia noticed the slight tension in his jaw. "Your father again. He's concerned about some of my recent decisions," Julian said, his tone sardonic. "Apparently, cancelling dinner with the Whitman family last week was politically unwise. Never mind that their daughter Charlotte is about as interesting as watching paint dry. The burden of being a Lancelot." Tialia's voice held understanding rather than judgment. "A burden I'm increasingly ready to shed." He brought her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles softly. "You've shown me there's so much more to life than maintaining appearances and making strategic alliances." The waiter appeared with a bottle of wine, a robust Barolo that the owner had personally recommended. As he poured, Julian noticed how the man's eyes widened slightly at their clasped hands, the contrast of their skin tones evident in the candlelight. It was a reaction they were becoming accustomed to, the double takes, the lingering glances, the whispered comments just barely out of earshot. Once they were alone again, Tialia addressed what they both had noticed. "It's going to get harder, you know. These past weeks have been like living in a beautiful dream, but reality is going to catch up eventually." "Let it," Julian said with quiet intensity. "I don't want to hide what we have. I don't want to pretend this is anything less than what it is." "And what is it?" Tialia asked softly, her heart pounding. Julian stood, pulling her to her feet and into his arms, not caring who might see. "It's everything," he whispered against her hair. "You're everything." They left the restaurant hand in hand, stepping into the cool evening air. The streets of the village were alive with energy, musicians playing on corners, couples strolling arm in arm, the eternal pulse of New York City at night. They walked without destination, simply enjoying each other's presence. Their wandering led them to Washington Square Park, where a street musician was playing At Last on a saxophone, the melody floating through the night air like a benediction. Without a word, Julian pulled Tialia into his arms, and they began to dance beneath the arch. "People are watching," Tialia murmured, though she made no move to pull away. "Let them watch," Julian replied, spinning her gently before drawing her close again. "Let them see what love looks like." The word hung between them, unspoken until now, but felt in every heartbeat, every touch, every shared glance. Tialia looked up at him, her eyes shining with emotions too deep for words. "Love," she repeated softly, testing the weight of it on her tongue. "I love you, Tialia Azana," Julian said, his voice firm with conviction. "I love your brilliance, your strength, your vision. I love how you challenge me to be better, to see the world differently. I love that you're not impressed by my name or my wealth. I love—" She silenced him with a kiss that spoke volumes, her arms wrapping around his neck as his hands pulled her closer. The saxophone player smoothly transitioned into "What a Wonderful World," and neither of them noticed the small crowd that had gathered to watch their dance of love. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Tialia whispered, "I love you too. God help me, but I do." The moment was interrupted by the flash of a camera. A group of young people nearby had their phones out, capturing what must have seemed like a romantic scene, the well-dressed couple dancing in the park at night. But Julian and Telia knew instantly that their private world was about to become very public. "We should go," Julian said, noting how quickly the photos were likely being uploaded to social media. He could already imagine the headlines, "Lancelot heir seen with mystery woman," or worse, more explicit references to their racial differences. They caught a cab to Julian's penthouse, the ride filled with a mixture of tension and anticipation. They had been careful until now, meeting in places where they were less likely to be recognized, avoiding the spotlight that constantly followed the Lancelot name, but tonight had changed everything. In the elevator up to his apartment, Telia finally voiced what they both were thinking. "This is going to complicate things at Sterling and Reich. The board is still evaluating my proposal, and now—" Julian turned to her, his expression fierce. "Your technology stands on its own merits. If anyone dares to suggest otherwise—" "They will," she cut in gently. "You know they will. Just like they'll say, I'm sleeping my way to funding, like they'll say you're rebelling against your father, like they'll say 1,000 things that have nothing to do with how we feel about each other." The elevator doors opened directly into his penthouse, where floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city they both loved. Julian led her to the terrace, the night air cool against their skin. "Then let me withdraw from the evaluation committee," he said. "I'll recuse myself from any decisions about Blockfin. Your company deserves to be judged solely on its revolutionary potential." Telia touched his face gently. "You're willing to step back from one of the biggest deals of the year?" "I'd step back from everything if that's what it takes to be with you openly, honestly." He covered her hand with his own. "I'm tired of living according to others' expectations. I want to live according to my heart." They stood there in the moonlight, the city spread out before them like a sea of stars, both knowing that tomorrow would bring challenges they couldn't yet imagine. Julian's phone buzzed again, more messages from his father, probably responding to photos that were already circulating online. "Stay with me tonight," Julian whispered, drawing her closer. "Let's have one more perfect night before we face the storm." Telia's answer was a kiss that tasted of wine and destiny, of passion and promise. They made love under the stars, their bodies moving together with an intensity that spoke of both desire and defiance. Every touch was a declaration, every kiss a vow that what they had found was worth fighting for. Later, as they lay tangled in silk sheets, Tialia traced patterns on Julian's chest while he ran his fingers through her hair, now freed from its elegant updo. The city lights cast patterns across their intertwined forms, creating a chiaroscuro of intimacy. "Tell me what you're thinking," Julian murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I'm thinking about my parents," she replied honestly. "About how they fought for their love during the civil rights era, how they taught me to be proud of who I am. And I'm thinking about how they might react to this, to us. Are they as traditional as my family?" Telia laughed softly. "In their own way. They fought so hard for me to have opportunities they never had. They might worry that being with you could somehow overshadow everything I've built on my own." "They raised an extraordinary woman," Julian said, pulling her closer. "Nothing and no one could overshadow your light." The night deepened around them as they talked about their fears and hopes, about the battles they knew were coming. Julian spoke of his father's rigid worldview, of family expectations that stretched back generations. Tialia shared stories of her own struggles in the tech world, of having to work twice as hard to be taken half as seriously. As dawn approached, they stood together at the windows, watching the city awaken. Julian's arms wrapped around Tialia from behind, their reflections overlapping in the glass. "Whatever comes," he promised, "we face it together. No hiding, no apologies." "No regrets?" she asked, turning in his arms. "Only that I didn't find you sooner." His kiss was tender, a seal on his words. The sun rose over Manhattan, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. In his private gallery of memories, Julian would always remember Tialia like this, bathed in morning light, her beauty both fierce and vulnerable, her presence in his life a testament to love's power to transform. They had been dancing with fire these past weeks, and now the flames were about to rise higher. But as they held each other in the growing light, they knew that some things were worth getting burned for. Their love was no longer just a private joy. It was about to become a statement, a challenge to a world that too often sought to dictate who could love whom. The day ahead would bring its own trials. But for now, they had this moment, this sunrise, this love that had ambushed them both and changed everything. In each other's arms, they found the strength to face whatever storms were gathering on the horizon. Their dance with fire was just beginning, but they would dance it together, letting their love light the way forward into an uncertain but promising future. Chapter 4. The Boardroom and the Heart. The Sterling and Reich boardroom felt different now. Julian sat at his usual place at the mahogany table, but his eyes kept drifting to the empty chair where Tialia had sat during her presentation weeks ago. The morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the polished surface as the investment committee gathered for their weekly meeting. Alexander Wade, Julian's protégé, was delivering his analysis of Blockfin Technologies. At 30, Wade was already showing signs of the ruthless ambition that drove success on Wall Street. His perfectly pressed suit and carefully styled hair spoke of someone who understood the power of appearance. But there was something cold in his eyes that Julian had never noticed before. "The technology is impressive," Wade admitted, flipping through his presentation. "Blockfin's blockchain solution could revolutionize international transactions. However," he paused, his eyes flickering briefly to Julian, "there are concerns about the company's leadership structure." Julian's hand tightened imperceptibly around his Mont Blanc pen. "The CEO has an impressive track record," he said, keeping his voice neutral. "Stanford MBA. Successful exits from 2 previous startups." "True," Wade conceded with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "but there are rumors about personal entanglements that might cloud objective judgment." The room temperature seemed to drop several degrees. Julian felt the weight of multiple gazes, some curious, others calculating. The photos from Washington Square Park had indeed made their rounds through Manhattan's elite circles, spawning whispers and speculation. "I've recused myself from the final decision," Julian reminded them, his tone carrying a warning edge. "Blockfin should be evaluated solely on its merits." "Of course," Wade agreed smoothly, "though one might argue that your involvement has already influenced the process." Before Julian could respond, the boardroom door opened, and Tialia walked in, her presence immediately commanding attention. She wore a cream-colored suit that contrasted beautifully with her skin, her hair styled in elegant cornrows that spoke of both professionalism and cultural pride. Several board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "I apologize for interrupting," she said, her voice clear and confident. "But since you're discussing my company, I thought it appropriate to address any concerns directly." Julian's heart raced at the sight of her, remembering how she had felt in his arms just hours ago, how her lips had traced promises along his skin. But here, in this realm of power and money, they had to maintain a careful distance. Tialia moved to the front of the room, pulling up her own presentation with practiced ease. "Let's talk numbers," she began, launching into a detailed analysis that made Wade's concerns seem petty and personal in comparison. She commanded the room with a presence that demanded respect, her intelligence and vision shining through every word. As she spoke, Julian watched the board members' reactions. Some were clearly impressed, others remained skeptical, but none could deny the power of her presentation. She wasn't just defending her company, she was proving why she belonged in this room, why Blockfin deserved their investment. The meeting stretched on, becoming a subtle battle of wills. Wade attempted to raise more concerns, but Telia countered each one with data and market analysis. Julian maintained his professional demeanor, though his pride in her brilliance threatened to show through his carefully constructed facade. Finally, the chairman called for a break. As the room emptied, Julian and Telia found themselves momentarily alone. The air between them crackled with unspoken words. "That was impressive," he said softly, maintaining a professional distance despite his desire to take her in his arms. "I learned long ago never to let others define my worth," she replied, her eyes meeting his with an intensity that made his breath catch. "Though I must admit, having you in my corner makes the battle easier. I wish I could do more." "You're doing exactly what you should, letting me fight my own battles while standing beside me, not in front of me." Their moment was interrupted by Wade's return. His smile was practiced, but his eyes held calculation. "Ms. Azana, your presentation was enlightening. Perhaps we could discuss it further over dinner." The suggestion carried hidden barbs, and Julian felt a surge of protective anger. But Talia's response was perfectly poised. "Thank you, Mr. Wade, but I make it a policy not to mix business with pleasure." Her smile was professional, but her meaning was clear. "All relevant data is in the proposal. I trust that will be sufficient for your analysis." The afternoon session was equally intense, with various board members picking apart Blockfin's business model. Tealia handled each question with grace and intelligence, while Julian fought to maintain his professional detachment. Every time she spoke, he remembered their conversations in his penthouse, her passion for technology and innovation shining through even in their most intimate moments. As the sun began to set over Manhattan, casting orange light through the windows, the board finally called for a vote on moving forward with due diligence. Julian, true to his word, abstained. The tension in the room was palpable as the votes were counted. The result was positive, but barely. Blockfin would move to the next phase of evaluation. Talia's face showed no emotion, but Julian could read the relief in her shoulders, the subtle release of tension she had been carrying all day. The boardroom slowly emptied, leaving them alone again. Outside, the city lights were beginning to twinkle against the darkening sky. They stood at opposite ends of the room, the physical distance between them feeling like both protection and punishment. "Dinner?" Julian asked softly, once he was sure they were truly alone. "I should work on the due diligence documents," Telia replied, though her eyes said something different. "You need to eat." He moved closer, careful to maintain a professional distance in case anyone walked in. "I know a place where we can just be us. No boardrooms, no politics." She smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her face from professional CEO to the woman he loved. "Lead the way, Mr. Lancelot." They took separate elevators down to the lobby, a necessary pretense that felt increasingly difficult to maintain. Julian's driver was waiting outside, but instead of heading to his usual haunts, he directed them to a small Korean restaurant in Queens. The tiny restaurant was warm and inviting, with paper lanterns casting a soft glow over worn wooden tables. The elderly owner greeted them with genuine warmth, not caring about their different backgrounds or the obvious expense of their clothing. In a private booth at the back, they finally allowed themselves to relax. Tealia removed her suit jacket, and Julian loosened his tie. Their fingers intertwined naturally across the table. "You were magnificent today," Julian said, his thumb tracing patterns on her hand. "I've never seen Wade so thoroughly put in his place." Tialia laughed softly. "He's not the first man to underestimate me, and he won't be the last, though I suspect his interest isn't just professional rivalry." "I noticed," Julian's voice held a hint of growl. "His dinner invitation was rather transparent." "Jealous?" she teased, though her eyes were serious. "You know you have nothing to worry about." "It's not you I'm worried about. Wade is ambitious, and he's noticed how I look at you. He'll try to use this against us both." Their conversation paused as the owner brought out a feast of dishes, steaming bowls of soon dubu, perfectly grilled kalbi, and an array of colourful banchan. The familiar ritual of sharing food helped ease the tension of the day. "We knew this wouldn't be easy," Telia said, using her chopsticks to place a piece of meat on Julian's rice. "But I won't let anyone use our love to discredit my company or your judgment." Julian watched her in the warm light, marveling at her strength and grace under pressure. "Move in with me," he said suddenly. Tialia's chopsticks paused halfway to her mouth. "What? Move in with me," he repeated, more certain now. "I'm tired of pretending. Let them talk, let them speculate. I want to wake up with you every morning, fall asleep with you every night. I want our love to be something we celebrate, not something we hide." "Julian," she set down her chopsticks, her expression serious. "Think about what you're asking. The board is already suspicious of our relationship. Your father—" "I don't care about the board or my father," he interrupted passionately. "I care about you, about us, about building a life together that's true to who we are." The owner appeared with 2 small glasses of soju, smiling knowingly at their intense expressions before discreetly withdrawing. Tialia took a sip, gathering her thoughts. "When I was little," she said finally, "my mother told me that love isn't just about feeling. It's about timing, about knowing when to leap and when to wait. And what does your heart tell you now?" She looked at him, really looked at him, seeing past the expensive suit and privileged upbringing to the man who had captured her heart. "My heart tells me to leap," she admitted. "But my head reminds me that Blockfin needs this deal, and your position at Sterling and Reich." Julian reached across the table, taking both her hands in his. "Blockfin will succeed because your technology is revolutionary and you're brilliant. My position at Sterling and Reich is just a job. You're my future." Tears shimmered in Telia's eyes, but she didn't let them fall. "You make it sound so simple." "It is simple," he insisted. "Everything else, the board, the society pages, our family's expectations, that's all noise. What we have is real. It's pure. It's worth fighting for." The restaurant had emptied around them, the paper lanterns creating a cocoon of warmth and intimacy. In this moment, the pressures of the boardroom seemed distant, replaced by the certainty of their connection. "Yes," Talia whispered, a smile breaking through her tears. "Yes?" "Yes, I'll move in with you." She squeezed his hands. "You're right. What we have is worth fighting for, worth celebrating." Julian stood, pulling her up and into his arms, not caring who might see through the restaurant windows. Their kiss tasted of kimchi and promise, of defiance and devotion. The owner appeared again, beaming as she presented them with sweet rice cakes. "For happiness," she said in broken English, "for love." Later that night, in Julian's penthouse, soon to be their penthouse, they stood on the terrace looking out over the city that had brought them together. Tialia leaned back against Julian's chest, his arms wrapped securely around her. "Tomorrow will be interesting," she mused, thinking of the reactions their announcement would generate. "Tomorrow will be perfect," Julian countered, pressing a kiss to her neck, "because I'll face it with you." Below them, Manhattan continued its eternal dance of light and shadow, unaware that in a penthouse high above, two hearts had chosen love over convention, truth over appearance, courage over comfort. The boardroom might have its rules and protocols, but the heart had its own imperatives. And tonight, love had won another round in its eternal battle against fear and prejudice. As they turned away from the city view and toward their shared future, both Julian and Tialia knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges. But they would face them together, their love a shield against judgment, their commitment to each other stronger than any corporate politics or societal expectations. In the end, the boardroom might control million-dollar decisions, but the heart controlled something far more valuable: the courage to love without boundaries, to choose happiness over convention, to write their own story in defiance of the world's expectations. Chapter 5. Betrayal's Sharp Edge. The morning sun had barely touched the Manhattan skyline when Julian's phone erupted with notifications. He was in the kitchen of their penthouse, preparing Tialia's favorite breakfast, French press coffee and vanilla bean crepes, when the first message arrived. It was from Alexander Wade, containing only a link to a financial news website. Julian's heart stopped when he saw the headline, "Sterling and Reich Partners Affair with Tech CEO Raises Ethics Concerns." Below it was the photo from Washington Square Park, but the article painted their beautiful moment in shadows of scandal and impropriety. Anonymous sources within Sterling and Reich investment banking raise concerns over the evaluation process of BlockFin Technologies, the article read. Questions arise about the relationship between partner Julian Lancelot and BlockFin CEO Tialia Azana, suggesting possible preferential treatment and insider trading implications. The smell of burning crepe snapped Julian back to reality. As he moved the ruined breakfast aside, Tialia appeared in the kitchen doorway, wrapped in his silk robe. One look at his expression told her something was wrong. "How bad is it?" she asked, moving to his side. Instead of answering, he handed her his phone. She read in silence, her posture stiffening with each word. When she finished, she placed the phone face down on the counter with deliberate care. "Wade," she said, not a question. "Wade," Julian confirmed, pulling her into his arms. "He's making his move." They stood together in the morning light, the city spreading out below their window like a sea of glass and steel. Tialia's head rested against Julian's chest, his heartbeat steady beneath her ear. "They're trying to discredit both of us," she said finally. "My technology, your judgment, everything we've worked for." Julian's phone buzzed again, this time with a message from the board chairman requesting an immediate meeting. Moments later, Tialia's phone lit up with notifications from her investors, all demanding explanations. "We knew this might happen," Julian reminded her, his fingers tracing soothing patterns on her back. "We knew they'd try to use our love against us." But insider trading accusations. Tialia pulled back to look at him, her eyes fierce. "That's not just office politics, Julian. That's potentially criminal." Before he could respond, both their phones began ringing simultaneously. The real storm was beginning. The next few hours were a blur of activity. They dressed quickly, Julian in a charcoal Tom Ford suit that felt like armor, Tialia in a power suit of deep burgundy that made her look like a warrior queen. They shared one last kiss before departing separately, maintaining at least the appearance of professional distance. Sterling and Reich's offices were buzzing with barely concealed excitement when Julian arrived. Conversations stopped as he passed, replaced by whispers and significant looks. He kept his head high, his face impassive, channeling generations of Lancelot pride. The boardroom, usually a place of calculated power plays, felt like a courtroom today. The chairman, Douglas Montgomery, sat at the head of the table, his expression grave. Alexander Wade was there too, looking appropriately concerned while barely concealing his satisfaction. "This is a serious situation, Julian," Montgomery began without preamble. The implications for the firm are non-existent, Julian interrupted smoothly. I recused myself from all decisions regarding Blockfin Technologies the moment my relationship with Ms. Azana began. Every evaluation, every vote, every decision has been documented and witnessed. There has been no impropriety. The appearance of impropriety can be just as damaging, Wade interjected, his concern almost convincing. The market runs on trust, Julian. You know this. Julian turned to face his former protégé, seeing him clearly for the first time. Yes, Alexander, I do know this, just as I know that anonymous sources rarely act without motivation. Wade's smile flickered but held. Are you suggesting something? I'm stating it plainly. You orchestrated this leak, hoping to damage both my reputation and Blockfin's chances for funding. The question is why? The room grew tense as the two men stared each other down. Montgomery cleared his throat uncomfortably. Gentlemen, this isn't productive. The fact remains that we have a public relations crisis on our hands. Julian, the board feels it would be best if you took a leave of absence while we conduct an internal review. A leave of absence? Julian's laugh held no humor. You mean exile while you wait for this to blow over? It's for the best, Wade said softly, for everyone involved. Meanwhile, across town, Telia was facing her own battles. Her board of directors had convened an emergency meeting, and the atmosphere was equally tense. This is exactly what we were worried about, Michael Chen, her lead investor, was saying. Association with the Lancelot name was bound to bring scrutiny. My personal life has no bearing on Blockfin's technology or potential, Tialia countered, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Our blockchain solution is revolutionary, yes, another board member interrupted, but innovation isn't enough. We need credibility, stability. These headlines are a deliberate attempt to discredit both the company and my leadership, Talia finished, and by reacting exactly as the perpetrators hoped, you're playing into their hands. She stood, commanding the room's attention. I built this company from nothing. I developed this technology when everyone said it couldn't be done. I've faced skepticism and prejudice at every step, and I'm still standing. If you think I'll let a manufactured scandal derail everything we've built, you don't know me at all. Her phone buzzed with a text from Julian. Don't let them break you. You're stronger than all of them combined. Drawing strength from his words, Tialia continued, I won't apologize for falling in love. I won't apologize for who I love. And I certainly won't apologize for building a company that's going to change the financial industry forever. If any of you have concerns about my leadership, my integrity, or my commitment to Blockfin's success, speak now. The silence that followed was deafening. Back at Sterling and Reich, Julian was cleaning out his office. The leave of absence wasn't optional, but he would be damned if he'd slink away in shame. As he packed his personal items, Wade appeared in the doorway. It didn't have to be this way, Wade said, almost regretfully. If you had just been more discreet. Julian continued packing, his movements deliberate. You know what your mistake was, Alexander? Thinking that love is a weakness to be exploited. In reality, it's the source of my strength. Poetic, Wade smirked. But this is Wall Street, Julian. Poetry doesn't move markets. No, Julian agreed, finally facing him. But integrity does, truth does. And when this is over, everyone will know exactly who you are. The day stretched on, bringing more headlines, more accusations, more carefully orchestrated attacks on their relationship and professional integrity. Lancelot's scandal began trending on Twitter, with opinions ranging from support to outright racism. As evening fell, Julian and Tialia finally reunited in their penthouse. They were battle-worn but unbroken, drawing strength from each other's presence. They wanted to force my resignation, Tialia said, curled against Julian on their terrace, suggested it would be best for the company if I stepped down. And a fierce smile curved her lips. I reminded them that I hold majority voting rights. They can suggest whatever they want. Julian pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. That's my warrior queen. What about you? How bad is it? The leave of absence is mandatory. 3 months minimum while they investigate the allegations. He sighed. Wade played it perfectly. He knew targeting just one of us wouldn't be enough. Tialia turned in his arms, her eyes bright with determination. Then we fight back. Together. Together, he agreed. But we need to be smart about this. Wade will be expecting retaliation. They spent the night strategizing, their professional expertise turning toward a different kind of deal. Tialia's technical brilliance combined with Julian's understanding of Wall Street politics, creating a plan that would not only clear their names, but expose the true manipulation at play. As midnight approached, they stood together at their bedroom window, the city lights creating a galaxy of possibilities below. Julian's arms wrapped around Tialia from behind, her head resting back against his chest. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked softly. "Us." Tialia turned in his embrace, her hands coming up to frame his face. "Never. They can take my company, your position, everything we've built professionally, but they can't take this. They can't take us." Their kiss was fierce, passionate, a declaration of war against anyone who would try to tear them apart. They made love with an intensity born of defiance and devotion, each touch an affirmation of their commitment to each other. Later, as they lay tangled in sheets, Tialia traced the worried lines on Julian's face. "Tomorrow we start fighting back. Tonight just hold me." Julian pulled her closer, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. Outside their window, Manhattan continued its eternal dance of light and shadow, unaware that in a penthouse high above, two hearts were forging their love into a weapon that would shake the very foundations of Wall Street's power structure. Wade and his conspirators had unleashed their attack, thinking to break apart something beautiful. Instead, they had only succeeded in making it stronger, transforming a private love into a public statement of defiance against prejudice and manipulation. As sleep finally claimed them, Julian and Tialia remained entwined, their hearts beating in sync. The betrayal had cut deep, but their love was proving stronger than any knife, sharper than any edge their enemies could wield against them. The war had begun, but they would fight it together, their love not a weakness to be exploited, but a strength that would ultimately change the very rules of the game. Chapter 6. Family Ties That Bind. The Lancelot estate in Greenwich sprawled across 40 manicured acres, its Georgian architecture a testament to old money and older prejudices. Julian guided his Aston Martin through the wrought iron gates, the gravel drive crunching beneath the tires like bones. The autumn leaves painted the scene in shades of gold and crimson, but there was no warmth in the mansion's imposing facade. Richard Lancelot III stood at the top of the marble steps, every inch the patriarch in his bespoke suit and carefully cultivated silver hair. His expression was carved from granite as he watched his only son park beside the fountain. The same fountain where Julian had learned to swim, where he'd celebrated his graduations, where he'd once believed his future was as perfectly planned as the geometric gardens surrounding it. "You're late," Richard said by way of greeting, his voice carrying the weight of generations of disappointed fathers. "Traffic on the Merit," Julian replied, though they both knew it was a lie. He delayed the inevitable confrontation by driving in circles, gathering courage for what was to come. The great house swallowed them in silence, their footsteps echoing off marble floors and wood-panelled walls lined with portraits of Lancelot patriarchs. Julian's mother Elizabeth waited in the morning room, her elegance a careful mask for her anxiety. She rose to embrace her son, her perfume a familiar comfort. "Darling," she whispered, holding him tight for a moment before propriety demanded she step back. "Shall we dispense with pleasantries?" Richard moved to the sideboard, pouring himself a measure of scotch despite the early hour. The situation is untenable. The situation, Julian echoed, his tone dangerous, has a name, Tialia, and she's the woman I love. Love. Richard's laugh was sharp as broken glass. This isn't about love. This is about reputation, about legacy, about the very foundation of everything our family has built. Elizabeth perched on the edge of an antique settee, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Your father is concerned, Julian. These headlines, the accusations, manufactured by people who fear change, Julian cut in, who fear anything that threatens their narrow view of the world. Narrow? Richard slammed his glass down. I've built relationships with every major financial institution in the world. I've created opportunities for generations of our family. And you're willing to throw it all away for what? A dalliance with a woman who... Choose your next words very carefully, Father. Julian's voice was quiet, but carried an edge that made both his parents start. Tialia Azana is brilliant, accomplished, and more innovative than anyone I've met in our rarefied circles. She built her company from nothing, while I was handed everything on a silver platter. We gave you advantages, Richard growled, because you're a Lancelot. It's your duty to what? Maintain the careful fiction that money and privilege make us better than everyone else, that love should be constrained by social class and skin color. Elizabeth rose, moving to stand between her husband and son. Please, both of you, we can discuss this rationally. There's nothing rational about what he's doing, Richard snapped. Do you have any idea what this is doing to our standing in society? The calls I'm getting from the club, from the board members at the symphony. Julian laughed bitterly. The club? The symphony? Do you hear yourself, Father? The world is changing, but you're still clinging to these antiquated symbols of status. These antiquated symbols have protected our family's interests for generations. Richard's face was flushed with anger. Your grandfather built Sterling and Reich from nothing after the war. I expanded it into an international powerhouse. And you're willing to throw it all away for this infatuation. Infatuation? Julian moved to the window, looking out over the gardens where he'd played as a child, where he'd learned the unwritten rules of their privileged world. What I feel for Tialia isn't an infatuation. It's the most real thing I've ever known. Real, Richard scoffed. What's real is the damage you're doing to our family name, the opportunities you're squandering, the connections you're severing. Richard, please, Elizabeth interjected. Perhaps if we met her, Richard turned on his wife, and give credibility to this. Say it, Julian challenged, turning back to face his father. Say what you really think. Let's stop dancing around the real issue. The tension in the room could have been cut with a knife. Elizabeth sank back onto the settee, her face pale. The issue, Richard said carefully, is that some lines shouldn't be crossed. Some traditions shouldn't be broken. You have responsibilities, Julian, to this family, to our legacy. My only responsibility is to my heart, Julian replied, and my heart belongs to Tialia. Then you leave me no choice. Richard moved behind his desk, a fortress of mahogany and authority. Either you end this relationship and return to your senses, or you're cut off. No trust fund, no position at Sterling and Reich, no inheritance, nothing. Elizabeth gasped. Richard, no. It's not negotiable. Richard's voice was ice. I won't watch my only son destroy everything we've built for some misguided attempt at social justice. Julian stood very still, feeling the weight of generations pressing down on him. In his mind, he saw Tialia's face, felt the warmth of her love, the strength of her conviction. When he spoke, his voice was calm. You know what the difference is between Tialia and us, Father. She built something meaningful, something that will actually help people. While we've been patting ourselves on the back for maintaining the status quo, she's been innovating, creating, pushing boundaries. Don't be naive, Richard sneered. She's using you, your name, your connections. She rejected a billion-dollar offer from Goldman Sachs before she ever met me, Julian cut in. She doesn't need our money or our connections. She has something far more valuable, integrity. The word hung in the air like an accusation. Richard's face darkened. This is your final warning, Julian. End it now, or you're no longer my son. Julian moved to his mother, kissing her cheek gently. She clutched his hand, tears in her eyes. I'll always be your son, he said softly, but I won't be your puppet. Not anymore. He walked to the door, then turned for one final look at the man who had shaped so much of his life. You know what's ironic, Father? You taught me that a Lancelot never backs down from what he believes in, never compromises his principles. I'm just finally living up to that lesson. The drive back to Manhattan was a blur of autumn colors and tumbling thoughts. Julian's phone buzzed repeatedly, his mother's desperate texts, his father's assistant with paperwork to sign away his birthright, corporate lawyers beginning the process of severing his ties to Sterling and Reich. He found Tialia in their penthouse, working on her laptop despite the late hour. She took one look at his face and opened her arms. He went to her like a man dying of thirst, finding water, burying his face in her neck as the emotions of the day finally broke free. Tell me, she whispered, holding him close. So he did. Told her everything. His father's ultimatum, his mother's tears, the weight of generations of privilege and prejudice crashing down around them. Tialia listened in silence, her fingers running soothingly through his hair. When he finished, she took his face in her hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. Are you sure about this, about us? It's not too late to... He silenced her with a kiss that tasted of tears and truth. You're my family now, he whispered against her lips. You're my home. They made love slowly that night, each touch an affirmation, each kiss a promise. Afterward, as they lay tangled in sheets and starlight, Tialia traced the worried lines on his face. Tomorrow, she said softly, we face my parents. Julian pulled her closer, breathing in her familiar scent. Are they as formidable as the great Richard Lancelot III? More, she smiled, but in a different way. They fought too hard for their place in this world to trust easily, especially someone from my world, he finished, the world that tried to keep them down. Yes. She propped herself up on an elbow, looking down at him seriously. But they taught me something your father seems to have forgotten. That love is the only thing worth fighting for, the only legacy that truly matters. Julian reached up to trace the curve of her cheek, marveling at how this woman had transformed his world. Then we'll fight for it. Together. Outside their window, Manhattan glittered like a sea of stars, indifferent to the dramas playing out in penthouses and boardrooms. But in their bed, wrapped in each other's arms, Julian and Tialia had found a truth stronger than family names, more enduring than fortunes. Love, when it's real, makes its own rules, creates its own legacies, builds its own future. Tomorrow would bring new battles, new challenges, new opportunities to prove that their love was stronger than prejudice, more valuable than inheritance. But tonight they held each other, their hearts beating in sync, their love a rebellion against everything that would tear them apart. The family ties that had bound them to their separate worlds were stretching, breaking, reforming into something new, a connection forged not by blood or tradition, but by choice, by love, by the courage to defy expectations and write their own story. As they drifted to sleep, Julian remembered something his grandmother had told him long ago. The truest measure of a person isn't what they're willing to fight for, It's what they're willing to sacrifice for love. In Tialia's arms, he finally understood the wisdom of those words. He had lost a fortune today, an inheritance, a position of power. But he had gained something far more precious, the freedom to love without constraints, to build a future based on truth rather than tradition. In the end, it wasn't really a sacrifice at all. It was a victory. Chapter 7. The Price of Love. The Sterling and Reich boardroom felt different from this side of the table. Julian sat before his former colleagues, no longer as a partner, but as a man about to change everything. The morning light streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the polished mahogany surface where he had once commanded respect and fear. Alexander Wade sat in Julian's old chair, trying to hide his smirk behind a carefully constructed mask of professional concern. The other partners lined the table like a jury, their expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed disdain. The chairman, Douglas Montgomery, cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Are you sure about this, Julian?" Montgomery asked, his tone suggesting one final chance at redemption. "Walking away from Sterling and Reich. It's unprecedented." Julian's smile was calm, confident. "I'm not walking away, Douglas. I'm moving forward." He stood, buttoning his Tom Ford suit jacket with practiced ease. The fabric felt different now, less like armor and more like a costume he'd soon shed. His voice carried through the room with quiet authority. "For 15 years, I've sat in this room, making decisions that affected markets, but never really changed lives. We've moved billions of dollars, created wealth for the already wealthy, maintained a system that benefits the few at the expense of the many." Wade's smirk faltered slightly as Julian continued. "Today, I'm not just resigning from Sterling and Reich. I'm announcing the creation of Lancelot Ventures, a firm dedicated to funding minority-owned startups and innovative technologies that serve the underserved. And our first investment," he paused, enjoying the tension in the room, "will be in BlockFin Technologies." The reaction was immediate. Partners shifted uncomfortably in their leather chairs. Whispers erupted around the table. Wade's face turned an interesting shade of red. "You can't," he sputtered. "The non-compete clause in your contract doesn't apply," Julian finished smoothly. "As my father's lawyers were so eager to remind me when they cut me off, I'm no longer bound by family obligations or corporate restrictions. I'm free to compete with Sterling and Reich in any way I choose." He placed a thick folder on the table. "This contains my formal resignation, along with documentation of certain irregularities I've discovered in recent dealings, including evidence of who really leaked those stories to the press and why." Wade's face went from red to white. Montgomery reached for the folder with trembling hands. "You're bluffing," Wade said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Am I?" Julian's smile was razor-sharp. "Check your email. I believe the SEC is particularly interested in your recent communications with certain tech journalists." The boardroom erupted in chaos as Julian walked out, his steps light with freedom. In the elevator, he loosened his tie and checked his phone. One message from Tialia: "Done here too. Meet you at home." Across town, Tialia was concluding her own revolution. The BlockFin board meeting had started tense, but ended in triumph. She stood before her investors, every inch the CEO they had underestimated. "The numbers don't lie," she declared, pointing to the projection screen behind her. "Our technology isn't just revolutionary, it's profit-generating. While you were all concerned about headlines and scandals, we secured contracts with 3 major international banks." Michael Chen, her lead investor, leaned forward. "But the Sterling and Reich deal was never our only option," Tilia cut in. "Julian Lancelot saw our potential not because of any personal relationship, but because he's brilliant at spotting innovation. And now, with Lancelot Ventures backing, we're positioned to expand even faster than originally projected." She clicked to the next slide, showing partnership offers from companies around the world. Our blockchain solution is being hailed as the future of international banking. The publicity from the scandal, it only made more people pay attention to what we're actually building. The board members exchanged glances, their earlier skepticism transforming into reluctant admiration. Tialia continued her presentation, each slide hammering home the truth. BlockFin wasn't just surviving the scandal, it was thriving. As the meeting concluded, Chen approached her privately. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "We should have trusted your leadership." Tialia's smile was gracious but firm. "Yes, you should have. Remember that the next time you're tempted to judge someone's capabilities based on anything other than their actual performance." The drive home was surreal. Manhattan's streets were alive with the usual afternoon bustle, but everything felt different. Tialia's driver navigated through traffic while she watched the city scroll past her window, remembering all the times she'd doubted herself, all the moments she'd wondered if the fight was worth it. In their penthouse, Julian was waiting with champagne and that smile that still made her heart skip. They met in the middle of their living room, coming together like magnets, finding their natural alignment. "How did it go?" he asked, though her triumphant expression told him everything. "They never saw it coming," she laughed, accepting a glass of champagne. "You?" "Wade's probably calling his lawyer right now," Julian grinned. "The SEC investigation should keep him too busy for revenge plots for quite a while." They moved to their terrace, the afternoon sun painting the city in shades of gold. Below them, Manhattan continued its eternal dance, unaware that today the rules of the game had changed. "Are you sure about this?" Tialia asked softly, turning to face him. "Starting over from scratch?" Julian set down his glass, pulling her close. "I've never been more sure of anything. The money, the position, the family name, none of it means anything compared to building something real, something that matters. With me?" Her voice held a hint of vulnerability that only he ever got to see. "Only with you." He kissed her softly, tasting champagne and triumph. "You showed me what real strength looks like, what it means to build something from nothing but vision and determination." They stood together, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of possibility. Julian's phone buzzed. Another message from his mother, probably pleading with him to reconsider. He ignored it. "Your father will never forgive this," Tialia murmured, though her tone suggested this didn't trouble her much. "Maybe not," Julian agreed. "But I've realized something important. His forgiveness isn't necessary for my happiness. You are." She turned in his arms, her eyes sparkling with mischief and love. "Smooth talker." "Honest talker," he corrected, capturing her lips in another kiss that spoke of promise and passion. Their celebration continued into the evening, moving from the terrace to the bedroom, where they made love with the fierce joy of warriors who had won their freedom. Every touch was a victory, every kiss a declaration of independence from the constraints that had tried to keep them apart. Later, as they lay tangled in sheets and starlight, Tialia traced the lines of Julian's face with gentle fingers. "Tell me about Lancelot Ventures," she said softly. "Tell me your vision." Julian caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "It's not just my vision, it's ours. I want to find other innovators like you, other dreamers who just need someone to believe in them. We'll fund companies that want to change the world, not just profit from it." Using the Lancelot name to reshape the very system it helped build, Tialia mused. "There's poetry in that." "There's justice in it," Julian corrected. "And hope. Think about all the brilliant minds out there, all the revolutionary ideas that never get a chance because the old guard is too afraid of change." "We'll find them," Tialia promised. "We'll build something beautiful together." Their phones continued to buzz throughout the night, reporters seeking comments, Society columnists hungry for scandal, friends and enemies trying to understand the day's events. They ignored them all, lost in their private celebration of love and liberation. As midnight approached, they stood together at their bedroom window, the city lights creating a constellation of possibilities below. Julian's arms wrapped around Tialia from behind, her head resting back against his chest. "No regrets?" he whispered against her hair. She turned in his embrace, her eyes shining with certainty. "Not one. You. My only regret is that I spent so many years thinking success meant following someone else's rules." He cupped her face in his hands. "You freed me, Tialia. You showed me what real courage looks like." Their kiss was tender, unhurried, full of promise for the future they would build together. Outside their window, Manhattan sparkled like a field of dreams waiting to be harvested, but the real magic was in their embrace, in the love that had cost them everything and given them something far more precious in return. The price of love had been high, family ties severed, positions of power surrendered, comfortable certainties abandoned. But as they held each other in the starlight, both Julian and Tialia knew they had gained something priceless. The freedom to love without constraints, the power to change the world on their own terms, and the joy of building a future that would inspire others to follow their hearts. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new battles to fight. But tonight belonged to them. Two hearts that had refused to be bound by society's expectations, two souls that had found in each other the courage to defy the world and win. The price of love had been high, but its rewards were beyond measure. In each other's arms they had found not just passion, but purpose, not just love, but liberation. And in that freedom, they would write their own rules, create their own legacy, and show the world that true love knows no bounds and fears no price. Chapter 8. Rising from the ashes. San Francisco's morning fog rolled in from the bay, wrapping the city's hills in ethereal white. From their new home in Pacific Heights, Julian and Tialia watched the sun slowly burn through the mist, revealing the Golden Gate Bridge like a revelation in red and gold. The Victorian mansion they'd chosen was worlds away from their Manhattan penthouse, warmer, more intimate, filled with character instead of cold modernity. "Still feels like a dream sometimes," Tialia murmured, curled against Julian on their wraparound porch. She wore one of his cashmere sweaters, her natural hair loose around her shoulders in the way he loved best. "Which part?" Julian asked, pulling her closer. "Moving across the country, starting over, or proving everyone wrong?" "All of it." She turned to face him, her eyes bright with joy and mischief, especially the part where the great Julian Lancelot trades his Tom Ford suits for Silicon Valley casual. He laughed, glancing down at his designer jeans and sweater. "I'd draw the line at hoodies and flip-flops." Their laughter mingled with the sounds of the awakening city, foghorns in the distance, cable cars clanging up steep hills, the persistent hum of innovation that made San Francisco different from anywhere else in the world. The past 6 months had been a whirlwind of change and triumph. Lancelot Ventures had quickly established itself as a major force in venture capital, with a focus on minority-owned startups and revolutionary technologies. Their first fund had closed at $2 billion, backed by investors who believed in their vision of changing the face of finance. BlockFin technologies had flourished even more dramatically. Tialia's blockchain solution was now being implemented by major banks across 3 continents. The same press that had once tried to scandalize their relationship was now hailing them as visionaries, pioneers of a new era in both technology and social progress. Julian's phone buzzed with a message from their office. "The Chen meeting's been moved up to 9, he said, but made no move to get up. These quiet moments with Tialia were too precious to rush. "Nervous?" she asked, though she knew the answer. Michael Chen, her former lead investor who had once doubted her, was now eager to partner with Lancelot Ventures on a new fund specifically for women of color in tech. "Not nervous," Julian replied, kissing her temple, "just amazed at how far we've come." Their new offices occupied the top floor of a renovated warehouse in Soma. The space was open and bright, with exposed brick walls and vast windows overlooking the bay. Unlike the sterile corridors of Sterling and Reich, this was a place designed to nurture innovation and creativity. They arrived together, turning heads as they always did. But here in San Francisco, the looks were different, admiring rather than judgmental, inspired rather than scandalized. Their love story had become something of a legend in Silicon Valley, proof that following your heart could lead to both personal and professional triumph. The morning meeting went beyond their expectations. Chen, once skeptical of their relationship, now spoke passionately about their vision for changing the venture capital landscape. "The numbers don't lie," he said, pointing to the projection screen. "Companies founded by women of color have consistently outperformed market averages, yet they receive less than 1% of venture funding. You two aren't just changing that, you're proving why it needs to change." After the meeting, Julian found Telia in her office, reviewing applications for their newest accelerator program. She looked up as he entered, her smile still capable of stopping his heart. "Remember when you first pitched Blockfin in that Sterling and Reich boardroom?" he asked, perching on the edge of her desk. "How could I forget? You tried so hard to look unimpressed." She stood, moving between his legs and wrapping her arms around his neck. "I was already falling in love with you," he admitted. "Your brilliance, your determination, the way you commanded that room." "Smooth talker," she teased, but her eyes softened with memory. "I was trying not to stare at you too obviously. The great Julian Lancelot, known for making CEOs tremble, looking at me like I was the most fascinating thing he'd ever seen." You are." He pulled her closer, not caring that their office walls were glass. They had nothing to hide anymore, no reason to pretend their love was anything but a source of strength. Their kiss was interrupted by a knock. Their head of HR, a young woman with blue hair and multiple piercings, didn't bat an eye at their embrace. "Sorry to interrupt, but the new cohort of founders is here for orientation. And Tialia, your parents just arrived at the airport. Their Uber should be here in 20 minutes." Tialia's parents had finally accepted their invitation to visit, to see firsthand what their daughter and her controversial love had built together. Unlike the cold halls of the Lancelot estate, this would be a different kind of family reunion. "Nervous?" Julian asked as they rode the elevator down to meet them. "They're going to love you," Telia assured him, squeezing his hand. "Just be yourself, the real you, not the Wall Street version." James and Maria Zana stepped out of their Uber with the careful dignity of people who had fought too hard for too long to take anything for granted. James, a retired civil rights lawyer, carried himself with quiet strength. Marie, who had built a successful catering business from nothing, had Tialia's same fierce grace. The moment they saw their daughter, their faces lit up with pride and love. Telia ran to them like a child, enveloped in their embrace. Julian held back, giving them their moment, until Telia reached for his hand and pulled him forward. "Mama, Daddy, this is Julian. The real Julian, not the man you've read about in the papers." Marie studied him with keen eyes that missed nothing. James's handshake was firm, testing. "So," James said, "you're the man who gave up an empire for our daughter." "No, sir," Julian replied honestly. "I'm the man your daughter helped free from a gilded cage. Everything we've built here, everything we're achieving, it's because she showed me what real strength looks like." Marie's expression softened slightly. "And what did our daughter show you about strength, Mr. Lancelot?" "That it comes from being true to yourself, no matter what the world thinks. That real power isn't about maintaining the status quo. It's about having the courage to change it. They spent the day showing Tialia's parents their world. The innovative office space, the startups they were nurturing, the community they were building. Over dinner at their favorite restaurant in North Beach, James and Marie shared stories of their own struggles, their own battles against prejudice and limitation. "We fought so hard," Marie said, watching her daughter with shining eyes, "to give Tialia opportunities we never had. But you've done something we never imagined. You've made those opportunities available to others." "That's what love does," Tialia said softly, her hand finding Julian's under the table. "It makes you want to share your blessings, to lift others as you rise." Later that night, after her parents had retired to their guest room, Julian and Tialia stood on their porch again, watching the fog roll in. The city lights twinkled through the mist like stars brought down to earth. "Happy?" Julian asked, though he could feel the joy radiating from her. "Beyond happy," she replied, turning in his arms. "We're not just living our love story anymore. We're helping others write their own. Every entrepreneur we fund, every barrier we break, is a victory for love over fear," he finished, capturing her lips in a kiss that tasted of wine and triumph. They had risen from the ashes of scandal and rejection, but they had done more than just survive. They had transformed their love into a force for change, their passion into a mission that was reshaping the landscape of power and opportunity. The fog continued its dance around their hilltop sanctuary, but their view had never been clearer. They had found in each other not just love, but purpose, not just passion, but the power to make a difference. As they held each other under the misty San Francisco sky, both Julian and Tialia knew that this was just the beginning. Their love had already changed their world. Now it was changing the world for others, proving that when hearts are true and courage is real, anything is possible. The night deepened around them, but their future had never been brighter. They had risen from the ashes of their old lives to build something beautiful and new, a love story that was also a revolution, a passion that was also a mission, a triumph that was just the beginning of their shared destiny. Chapter 9. The return Manhattan skyline glowed in the early autumn sunset, a familiar silhouette that now felt both foreign and intimate. 1 year after their departure, Julian and Tialia's private jet touched down at Teterboro Airport, bringing them back to the city where their love story began. The annual New York Tech Summit had invited Tialia to deliver the keynote address, while Julian was being honored with the Innovation in Finance Award for Lancelot Ventures' groundbreaking approach to inclusive investment. "Ready?" Julian asked, taking Tialia's hand as they descended the jet's stairs. She wore a custom-designed suit in deep purple that complemented her skin perfectly, her hair styled in an elegant updo that spoke of confidence and grace. "Born ready," she replied, though they both felt the weight of this return. New York had been the crucible of their love, the place where they had faced their greatest challenges and made their boldest choices. Their car wound through familiar streets, past the gleaming towers of the financial district where they had first met. Sterling and Reich's building stood as imposing as ever, but it no longer held any power over them. They had built something far more meaningful than its marble halls could contain. The Four Seasons Hotel had prepared their usual suite, but everything felt different now. They weren't hiding anymore, weren't sneaking moments between board meetings and social obligations. Their love had become a symbol of change, their success a testament to the power of following one's heart. "Look who's made the front page again," Tialia said, picking up the Wall Street Journal from their suite's coffee table. The headline read, "Blockfin Technologies revolutionizes international banking, stock soars to record high." Julian moved behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and reading over her shoulder. "I prefer the Forbes coverage," he murmured, nodding to the magazine featuring them both on the cover. Power couple reshaping Silicon Valley. How love conquered Wall Street. They had barely settled in when Julian's phone buzzed with a message that made him pause. "My mother," he said softly. "She wants to see us." Telia turned in his arms, studying his face. "Are you ready for that? With you beside me? I'm ready for anything." Elizabeth Lancelot had chosen the same private room at Le Bernardin where she had celebrated Julian's acceptance to Harvard 2 decades ago. She rose as they entered, her elegance unchanged, but her eyes holding a new warmth. "Julian," she breathed, embracing her son with uncharacteristic emotion. Then, to their surprise, she turned to Tialia and hugged her as well. "And Tialia, my dear, you look radiant." They settled into their seats, the awkwardness of the moment softened by Elizabeth's genuine attempt at connection. "Your father," she began carefully, "is too proud to admit it, but he's been following your success. The work you're doing with minority-owned businesses, the changes you're making in the industry." "Has it changed his mind?" Julian asked, though he already knew the answer. "He's evolving," Elizabeth said diplomatically. "The success of Lancelot Ventures has made some of his old friends question their assumptions, and when the Financial Times named you both among the most influential people in global finance—" "We didn't do it for recognition," Tialia said gently, "or to prove anyone wrong. We did it because it was right." Elizabeth studied them both, seeing perhaps for the first time the depth of what they shared. "I was wrong," she admitted quietly. "When all this began, I thought, but watching you both now, seeing what you've built together—" Julian reached across the table to take his mother's hand. "Thank you," he said simply. The next day, the tech summit buzzed with anticipation. The grand ballroom of the Javits Center was packed with industry leaders, entrepreneurs, and media. As Tialia took the stage, Julian watched from the front row, his heart swelling with pride. "A year ago," she began, her voice carrying clear and strong, "I stood in a different room in this city, pitching a vision that many thought was impossible. I faced skepticism not just about my technology, but about who I was, who I loved, what I represented." The room was silent, captivated. Today, BlockFin's blockchain solution is processing over $1 trillion in international transactions. We've made banking more accessible to underserved communities across 6 continents. But more importantly, we've proven that innovation knows no color, that brilliance wears no particular face, that love. Her eyes found Julian's, and the connection between them was almost visible. That love, when it's real and true, can be the most powerful force for change in the world. The applause was thunderous. In the audience, Julian noticed several former Sterling and Reich partners, including Alexander Wade, who had recently been indicted by the SEC. Their eyes met briefly, but Julian felt no triumph, no desire for revenge. He had something far better than vindication. He had love, purpose, and success on his own terms. That evening, they attended the annual Lancelot family gala, not as prodigal son and controversial girlfriend, but as honored guests. The same society that had once shunned them now clamored for their attention, desperate to be associated with their success. Julian led Tialia onto the dance floor, holding her close as the orchestra played. She was stunning in a gown that seamlessly blended African prints with haute couture, a statement of cultural pride and elegant sophistication. "They're all staring," she murmured against his ear. "Let them," he replied, spinning her gracefully. "Let them see what real love looks like, what real success means." They moved together with practiced ease, their bodies in perfect sync. The whispers that followed them now were of admiration rather than scandal, of respect rather than judgment. As they danced, Julian caught sight of his father standing at the edge of the ballroom. Richard Lancelot III looked older, somehow diminished by the year's events. Their eyes met across the crowd, and for a moment something passed between them. Not quite forgiveness, but perhaps understanding. Later that night, they escaped to their old favorite spot, the rooftop garden of their former penthouse, now converted into a public space as part of Lancelot Ventures' community initiative. The city spread out before them, a tapestry of lights and possibilities. "Remember our first kiss?" Tialia asked, leaning against the railing where they had once planned their future. Julian pulled her close, recreating that moment. "I remember thinking that nothing would ever be the same, that loving you was worth any price." "Was it?" she teased, though her eyes were serious. His answer was a kiss that held all the passion of their first embrace, all the certainty of their shared journey, all the promise of their future together. The night air was cool against their skin, carrying the familiar symphony of city sounds. Below them, Manhattan continued its eternal dance, but they had written their own rhythm, created their own melody of love and success. "We did it," Tialia whispered against his lips. "We proved them all wrong." "We did more than that," Julian corrected softly. "We proved ourselves right. We showed that love doesn't just conquer all, it builds something better in its place." They stayed on that rooftop until dawn, remembering where they had been, celebrating where they were, dreaming of where they would go next. Their return to New York wasn't an ending. It was another beginning, another chapter in a love story that continued to inspire and transform. As the sun rose over Manhattan, painting the sky in shades of possibility, Julian and Tialia held each other close, their hearts beating in perfect sync. They had returned not as prodigal children seeking acceptance, but as architects of change, proving that when love is real and true, it doesn't just survive society's judgment, it rewrites society's rules. The city awakened around them, but they were lost in their own world, in the miracle of their love that had conquered prejudice, transcended boundaries, and built something beautiful and new from the ashes of convention. Their return was more than a triumph. It was a testament to the power of love to transform not just two hearts, but the very world itself. Chapter 10. Bridges and Barriers. The San Francisco Botanical Garden bloomed with a fusion of traditions. White roses intertwined with vibrant African dahlias, creating an atmosphere that celebrated both heritage and unity. The garden's redwood grove had been transformed into a wedding sanctuary where two worlds would finally become one. Tialia stood before a full-length mirror in the garden's historic building, now converted into a bridal suite. Her wedding dress was a masterpiece of cultural fusion, a traditional white gown overlaid with hand-sewn African lace patterns, each stitch telling a story of heritage and hope. Her mother, Marie, adjusted the train while fighting back tears. "Your grandmother would have loved this," Marie said softly, touching the beaded patterns that echoed designs from their ancestral homeland. "She always said love would break down the strongest barriers." Tialia turned to embrace her mother, careful not to wrinkle the gown. "I wish she could be here." "She is, baby, in every stitch, in every beat of your heart." A knock at the door announced the arrival of Elizabeth Lancelot. Julian's mother had thrown herself into the wedding preparations with surprising enthusiasm, perhaps trying to make up for past mistakes. "May I come in?" Elizabeth asked, her usual sophistication softened by genuine emotion. "Of course," Marie welcomed her, the two mothers having formed their own unexpected bond over the past months. Elizabeth carried a small blue velvet box. "Something borrowed," she said, opening it to reveal a stunning pair of diamond earrings. "They've been in the Lancelot family for 5 generations. My mother-in-law gave them to me on my wedding day, and now—" Her voice trailed off as Tialia hugged her impulsively. The gesture spoke volumes about how far they had come, how love had gradually eroded the barriers between their families. Meanwhile, in another part of the garden, Julian adjusted his custom tuxedo, designed to incorporate subtle African patterns in its silk lapels. His best man, surprisingly, was Michael Chen, the former skeptic turned staunch ally who'd helped them revolutionize venture capital. "Nervous?" Chen asked, handing Julian a glass of rare scotch. "Not about marrying Tialia," Julian replied honestly. "Just hoping everything goes smoothly between the families." Richard Lancelot III had finally agreed to attend, though his acceptance had come late and laden with unspoken tension. He hadn't spoken to Julian since their confrontation a year ago, but Elizabeth had worked tirelessly to broker peace. The garden filled with an eclectic mix of guests, tech entrepreneurs Julian and Tialia had funded, Wall Street power players who had chosen sides wisely, civil rights activists who saw their union as a symbol of progress, and family members from both sides trying to bridge centuries of cultural division. Traditional African drums began a rhythmic heartbeat as the ceremony approached. Julian took his place under an arch woven with roses and kente cloth, his heart pounding in sync with the drums. The guests rose as the bridal procession began. Tialia appeared like a vision, escorted by her father. James Azana walked with the dignity of a man who had fought for civil rights, now walking his daughter toward a future he had once thought impossible. As they passed Richard Lancelot III in the front row, the elderly patriarch's stern expression softened almost imperceptibly. The ceremony blended traditions seamlessly. A distinguished African-American judge, who had mentored Tialia in her early career, officiated. They exchanged both traditional vows and personal promises that spoke of their unique journey. "Tialia," Julian's voice carried across the hushed garden, "you didn't just capture my heart, you freed it. You showed me that real strength isn't in maintaining barriers, but in having the courage to break them down. In you, I found not just love, but purpose, not just a partner, but a revolution." Tialia's vows were equally moving. "Julian, you proved that love isn't about fitting into someone else's story. It's about having the courage to write your own. You chose love over legacy, truth over tradition, and in doing so, you helped create a new legacy, a new tradition, one built on the belief that love knows no boundaries." The exchange of rings included both a traditional diamond and bands woven with African symbols of unity. As they were pronounced husband and wife, the drums reached a crescendo, joined by classical strings in a harmony that embodied their union. The reception was a celebration of cultures in dialogue. Gourmet cuisine shared space with traditional African dishes. A string quartet alternated with African dances. Tialia had changed into a stunning reception dress that incorporated traditional African prints in a modern design. During the father-daughter dance, James held Tialia close. "You did it, baby girl," he whispered. "You didn't just marry the man you love. You changed the very world that tried to keep you apart." The moment everyone held their breath for came during the toasts. Richard Lancelot III rose slowly, commanding attention as he had done in boardrooms for decades. The garden fell silent. "When I first learned of Julian and Tialia's relationship," he began, his voice carrying years of privilege and power, "I saw only what I might lose. A legacy I had spent my life protecting, a tradition I believed was worth any sacrifice to maintain." He paused, looking at the newly married couple. "I was wrong." The admission hung in the air like a thunderclap. "In trying to preserve what I thought was important, I almost lost what truly mattered, my son's happiness. Tialia," he turned to his new daughter-in-law, "you have not only proven yourself exceptional in business and character, but you have made my son a better man than any inheritance could have." Tears flowed freely now, not just from the bride and groom, but from many guests who understood the significance of this moment. Julian, Richard continued. You showed me that real legacy isn't about maintaining the past. It's about building a better future. You and Tialia haven't just created a successful business, you've created hope. And for that, I am not just proud, I am grateful. The celebration continued into the night. Julian and Tialia shared their first dance to a song specially composed for them, blending classical arrangements with African rhythms. As they moved together under the stars, their guests formed a circle around them, bearing witness to a love that had transformed not just two lives, but an entire society's understanding of what was possible. Later, as the party continued, they stole away to a quiet corner of the garden. The fog was rolling in, creating a magical atmosphere among the illuminated trees. "Happy?" Julian asked, holding his wife close. "Beyond happy," Tialia replied, her eyes shining. "Look at what our love has done, Julian. Look at how many barriers have fallen, how many bridges have been built." He kissed her softly, tasting joy and promise. "And we're just getting started." They rejoined their guests, moving between the worlds they had brought together. Former Sterling and Reich partners chatted animatedly with tech entrepreneurs they would have dismissed a year ago. Julian's society friends discovered common ground with Tialia's activist colleagues. Everywhere, the boundaries between worlds were blurring, dissolving in the face of love's transformative power. As the evening drew to a close, glasses were raised one final time. The garden glowed with hundreds of lights, each representing a barrier broken, a bridge built, a heart open to new possibilities. Julian and Tialia stood together, their hands clasped, their hearts beating as one. They had done more than just get married. They had proven that love, when it's real and true, has the power to change the world. The fog continued its dance among the trees, but their path had never been clearer. They had built bridges where others saw only barriers, created unity where others feared division, and in doing so, they had written a new chapter in the story of love itself. Their wedding wasn't just a celebration of their union, it was a testament to the power of love to transform, to heal, to create something beautiful and new from the ashes of old prejudices and fears. As they left the garden that night hand in hand, they carried with them the knowledge that their love story would continue to inspire others to break down barriers, to build bridges, to believe in the possibility of love that knows no bounds. Chapter 11. Legacy. The private room at San Francisco General Hospital was filled with early morning light when Maya Lancelot Azana entered the world, her first cry a declaration of existence that brought tears to both her parents' eyes. Julian held his newborn daughter with trembling hands, marveling at her perfect features, a beautiful blend of both their heritages. "She's magnificent," he whispered, carefully placing Maya in Tialia's arms. "Just like her mother." Tialia touched their daughter's tiny fingers, counting them through tears of joy. Maya's skin was a gorgeous caramel, her hair a crown of dark curls. Her eyes, when they fluttered open, held hints of both Julian's grey and Tialia's deep brown. "She's the future we fought for," Tialia said softly, looking up at her husband. "Everything we went through, every battle we faced, it was all for this moment." The news of Maya's birth travelled quickly. Within hours, both sets of grandparents had arrived, their past differences forgotten in the miracle of new life. Richard Lancelot III, who had continued his journey toward acceptance, stood at the window holding his granddaughter with tears in his eyes. "She's perfect," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "She's everything." Maria Zana watched him with understanding, remembering her own father's transformation when faced with the undeniable power of new life. "Children have a way of healing old wounds," she said gently, "of showing us what really matters." The next few months were a whirlwind of joy and discovery. Julian and Tialia had converted part of their Pacific Heights home into a nursery that celebrated both their cultures. African art shared space with family heirlooms, creating a room that told the story of Maya's rich heritage. They took turns with late-night feedings and diaper changes, finding new depths to their love in shared parenthood. Julian would often find Tialia in the nursery rocking chair, singing both lullabies and African songs to their daughter. These moments, quiet and precious, made all their struggles worthwhile. Their professional lives evolved to accommodate their new reality. Lancelot Ventures' office now included a state-of-the-art childcare centre, available to all employees. Blockfin Technologies had implemented industry-leading parental leave policies. They were determined that their daughter would grow up seeing her parents not just succeed, but create positive change in the world. One evening, as they watched Maya sleep in her crib, Tialia shared news that would change their lives again. "The doctor confirmed it today," she said, taking Julian's hand. "We're having another baby." Julian's joy was immediate and overwhelming. He lifted Tialia in his arms, spinning her gently as they both laughed quietly, careful not to wake Maya. "I love you," he whispered against her hair. "Both of you. All of us." Their family's growth coincided with the expansion of their vision for change. The Lancelot Azana Foundation, established shortly after Maya's birth, focused on supporting interracial families and promoting diversity in corporate leadership. They used their own story as a beacon of hope, showing that love could not only survive society's prejudices, but transform them. Maya's first birthday celebration became a gathering of the worlds they had brought together. The garden party at their home was filled with children of all backgrounds, their laughter a symphony of hope for the future. Richard Lancelot III, now fully embracing his role as a doting grandfather, spent the afternoon giving horseback rides to kids from the Foundation's mentorship program. "Look at him," Elizabeth said to Tialia, watching her husband with amazement. "You and Julian didn't just change each other's lives, you changed all of us." Tialia, now visibly pregnant with their second child, smiled as she watched Maya toddle between her grandparents, equally loved by all. "Love has a way of doing that," she replied, "of breaking down walls we thought were permanent." That evening, after the guests had left and Maya was asleep, Julian and Tialia sat in their garden under the stars. The fog was rolling in from the bay, creating a magical atmosphere as they discussed their growing family. "I never imagined this," Julian admitted, his hand resting on Tialia's growing belly. "When I was at Sterling and Reich, success meant something so different, so empty." "And now?" Tialia asked, though she knew the answer. "Now I understand what real legacy means. It's not about maintaining traditions that divide us. It's about creating new ones that bring us together." Their second child kicked beneath his hand, as if in agreement. They had already decided to name him Nathan, a name that honored both families' histories while creating its own meaning. The next morning brought news that their foundation's latest initiative, a scholarship program for children of interracial families, had received unprecedented support from major corporations. Their influence was growing, their love story continuing to inspire change across industries and communities. Maya's giggles echoed through the house as Julian chased her through the kitchen, her curls bouncing with each step. Tialia watched them from the doorway, one hand resting on her belly, her heart full of joy. "Mama!" Maya ran to her, arms raised to be lifted. Though her pregnancy made it difficult, Tialia couldn't resist scooping up her daughter, covering her face with kisses. Julian embraced them both, creating a circle of love that would soon expand to include Nathan. "My beautiful family," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. Later that day, they visited the Foundation's new community center in Oakland. Maya charmed everyone she met, showing no awareness of the racial boundaries that had once seemed so insurmountable. To her, love was love, family was family, and differences were something to celebrate, not fear. She's the future we dreamed of, Telia said as they watched their daughter play with children from all backgrounds. A world where love knows no boundaries. She's more than that, Julian replied, pulling his wife close. She's proof that dreams can become reality when you have the courage to fight for them. The sun set over San Francisco Bay, painting the sky in colors as diverse as the family they had created. Maya fell asleep on the drive home, clutching a drawing she had made at the center, stick figures of different colors all holding hands. In their bedroom that night, Julian held Tialia close, feeling Nathan's movements between them. The moonlight filtered through the fog, creating patterns on their walls that seemed to dance with possibility. "Do you ever think about how far we've come?" Tialia asked, tracing patterns on his chest, "from that first meeting in the Sterling and Reich boardroom to here." "Every day," Julian replied, kissing her softly. "Every time I see Maya smile, every time I feel Nathan kick, every time I look at you, I'm grateful for every step of our journey." Their love had created more than just a family. It had sparked a movement. Through their foundation, their businesses, and their personal example, they were showing the world that love could bridge any divide, heal any wound, create any miracle. Maya's soft breathing through the baby monitor was a reminder of their greatest achievement, a child born into a world where love was stronger than prejudice, where courage was rewarded with joy, where legacy meant building bridges instead of walls. As they drifted to sleep in each other's arms, their hearts beating in sync, they knew that their story would continue to inspire others. Through Maya and Nathan, through their foundation's work, through every life they touched, their love would ripple outward, changing the world one heart at a time. Their legacy wasn't just in their children's DNA or their family name. It was in the barriers they had broken, the minds they had opened, the love they had proven possible. Maya and Nathan would grow up in a world better than the one their parents had faced, and they would carry forward the torch of love's transformative power. The fog continued its eternal dance outside their windows, but their path had never been clearer. They had created not just a family, but a future where love knew no bounds, where courage changed reality, where legacy meant leaving the world better than they found it. In the quiet of their room, surrounded by the love they had fought so hard to protect, Julian and Tialia held each other close, grateful for every step of their journey and excited for every moment yet to come. Their story had become more than just a romance. It had become a beacon of hope, a testament to love's power to transform not just two hearts, but the very world itself. Chapter 12. Full Circle. The Sterling and Reich boardroom hadn't changed, but everything else had. 5 years after their love story began, Julian and Tialia stood together at the head of the table, not as supplicants or outcasts, but as architects of change. The morning light streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating a moment that would reshape the landscape of global finance forever. "Ladies and gentlemen," Julian addressed the assembled board members and press, his hand resting lightly on the small of Tialia's back. "Today marks more than just a merger between Lancelot Ventures and Blockfin Technologies. Today, we create the largest minority-owned financial technology firm in history." Tialia continued seamlessly, her presence commanding the room just as it had that first day. "But more importantly, we're creating a new model of corporate leadership, one that values diversity not just in demographics, but in thought, in experience, in vision." The room erupted in applause. Among the audience sat Richard Lancelot III, now a changed man who spent more time with his grandchildren than in boardrooms. Beside him, James and Marie Azana beamed with pride. In the 5 years since that first meeting, these families had become one, their love story rippling outward to transform not just their lives, but countless others. 4-year-old Maya sat on her grandfather Richard's lap, her caramel skin and perfect curls a living testament to love's power to bridge any divide. 2-year-old Nathan dozed in Marie's arms, peaceful despite the historic moment unfolding around him. They were the future personified, children who would grow up never questioning whether love had boundaries or limitations. As Julian and Tialia signed the merger documents, their hands brushed in a gesture that still sent electricity through both their bodies. 5 years of marriage had only deepened their connection, their love growing stronger with each challenge faced and overcome. The reception that followed was held on the rooftop garden where they had shared their first kiss. Now it was a public space, part of their foundation's initiative to create inclusive gathering places throughout the city. The Manhattan skyline stretched out before them, a witness to their journey from scandal to triumph. "Remember that first board meeting?" Tialia asked, accepting a champagne flute from her husband. "When everyone thought we were making the biggest mistake of our lives?" Julian pulled her close, not caring who saw. They had earned the right to their public displays of affection. The only mistake would have been letting fear win over love. Their success had become legendary in both Wall Street and Silicon Valley. Lancelot Ventures had funded over 1,000 minority-owned startups, creating a new generation of entrepreneurs who saw no limits to their dreams. BlockFin's technology had revolutionized international banking, making financial services accessible to communities that had long been ignored. But their greatest achievement stood playing by the rooftop fountain. Maya and Nathan, children who embodied the future they had fought to create. Maya, already showing signs of her mother's brilliance and her father's determination. Nathan, whose laugh could light up any room, whose very existence was a miracle of love over prejudice. "Mama! Papa!" Maya called, running to them with her brother toddling behind. Julian scooped them both up, his heart so full it threatened to burst. "My beautiful family," he whispered, holding them close as Tialia wrapped her arms around all three. The sun began to set over Manhattan, painting the sky in colors that seemed to celebrate with them. Their journey had come full circle, bringing them back to where it all began. But now they were stronger, wiser, more deeply in love than ever. Richard approached them, his eyes soft with emotion. "I was wrong," he said, not for the first time, but with deepening conviction. "What you've built together, it's more than I ever dreamed possible for the Lancelot name." "It's not about names anymore, Dad," Julian replied gently. "It's about love, about showing the world what's possible when we let love lead the way." As the evening wore on, they mingled with guests from every walk of life, tech entrepreneurs they had funded, civil rights leaders they had supported, young interracial couples who saw in them a model of what was possible. Their love story had become a beacon of hope, a testament to love's power to transform not just hearts, but entire industries, entire societies. Later, after the children had fallen asleep in their grandparents' arms, Julian led Tialia to a quiet corner of the rooftop. The city lights twinkled below them like a field of earthbound stars. "Happy?" he asked, though her radiant smile had already answered. "Beyond happy," she replied, turning in his arms. "We did it, Julian. Everything we dreamed, everything we fought for, we made it real." He kissed her then, with all the passion of their first kiss and all the depth of their shared journey. When they parted, both saw tears in the other's eyes. "You know what the best part is?" he asked, brushing away a tear from her cheek. "This isn't the end. It's just another beginning." As if on cue, a shooting star streaked across the Manhattan sky. They held each other close, these two souls who had dared to love beyond boundaries, who had turned their passion into purpose, their challenges into triumph. Their story had become more than just a romance. It was a revolution in love, a testament to the power of two hearts beating as one to change the very world itself. Through their children, their foundation, their businesses, and most importantly, their enduring love, they had written a new chapter in the human story. The night deepened around them, but their future had never been brighter. They had proven that love, when it's real and true, knows no boundaries, fears no obstacles, and has the power to transform everything it touches. As they held each other under the stars, their hearts beating in perfect sync, Julian and Tialia knew that their greatest legacy wasn't in the empires they had built or the fortunes they had made. It was in the love they had dared to fight for, the barriers they had broken, and the path they had blazed for others to follow. Their love story would be told for generations to come, not just as a tale of romance, but as proof that when two hearts are brave enough to choose love over fear, anything is possible. They had changed not just their own destinies, but the very definition of what love could achieve. And as the stars continued their eternal dance above Manhattan, Julian and Tialia shared one more kiss, a kiss that tasted of triumph, of joy, of promises kept, and dreams fulfilled. Their love had come full circle, but their story would never truly end. It would live on in every heart they had touched, every life they had changed, every barrier their love had broken. For in the end, their greatest achievement was proving that love, pure and true, has the power to rewrite the rules, reshape the world, and create a legacy that will inspire generations to come. Stop! Before you go any further, how will you find me in this huge world of fake channels? You might think they are Mr. Peter, but they are just using Al to clone my voice. Don't be fooled. Subscribe to my official channel and become part of this beautiful family. Let's stay together and keep the real stories alive.